My name is Irene Whitmore. I am 70 years old, retired teacher, widow, and mother of one. I spent 40 years raising a son and a farm at the same time, both built from the same soil and patience. And yet, lying there in the sterile white light of Harvest Memorial Hospital, I realized that neither one truly knew what I was made of. The monitor beside me beeped like a metronome, counting down the rest of my life. My chest ached from the surgery. My breath came shallow and sharp. I should have been thinking about survival. Instead, I heard voices at the door, a familiar one. Bright, polished, dripping with entitlement. Lila, my daughter-in-law. "She's sedated, Mom. The appraiser said we can list it now. 200 acres of nostalgia worth more dead than alive." I froze. Every syllable landed heavier than my heartbeat. "Daniel will sign once I tell him it's for his mother's medical bills," she added, lowering her voice. "We can close the deal before she's even discharged. By the time she wakes up, it'll be done." I didn't move. My eyelids stayed heavy, but my mind sharpened. I could smell disinfectant and betrayal in the same breath. They thought I was unconscious. They thought I couldn't hear. They were wrong. Her heels clicked closer, that metallic rhythm I'd come to dread echoing against the tile. "Don't worry, Mom," she whispered. "Once this sells, we'll finally be free of that place. No more muddy boots or old wallpaper. It's time for Daniel and me to live like real adults." Real adults. As if the people who taught her to read and eat and work weren't real enough. I heard her mother, Martha Stanton, chuckle softly on the phone's speaker. "You deserve better, sweetheart. That farm is a burden. It's a mercy to let it go. Mercy. They called stealing mercy." My hand trembled beneath the blanket until my fingers brushed against the phone on the tray table. I slid my thumb along the side until I felt the vibration. If my heart gave out again, at least the truth would live. The monitor beeped faster. A nurse poked her head in. Lila smiled sweetly. "Oh, she's resting," she said, voice full of sugar. "We'll let you work. Thank you for taking such good care of her." The nurse nodded and left. As soon as the door clicked shut, Lila leaned closer to my bed. Her perfume smelled like something expensive and artificial, the kind of scent that hides guilt. "By the time you wake up, Irene, you'll have one less thing to worry about," she murmured. "Your old farm will finally be in good hands." Her manicured fingers brushed the side rail of my bed as if blessing my exit. I counted each footstep as she walked away, the rhythm fading into silence. That silence was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. When the door closed, I opened my eyes. Slowly. The ceiling was still white, the air still heavy. But something inside me, something long asleep, had woken. I looked toward the window. Outside, dawn was breaking. The light hit the hospital glass like a mirror, and for the first time in years, I saw myself not as the frail old woman everyone pitied, but as the quiet witness to a crime wrapped in civility. They thought my farm was worthless. They didn't know that the same soil they mocked had roots that reached much deeper than they could ever dig, because while they plotted to sell my land, I held a secret, one I had kept out of decency, not pride. Their family, the Stantons, lived in a house with white shutters and blue trim on Maple Street, a house I owned the mortgage to under the company name Whitmore Holdings, LLC. Every month for 6 years, Martha Stanton's payment had arrived under my initials. IW. I had never told Daniel. I had never needed to. Some debts didn't need reminders, but now it was time to remember everything. The heart monitor slowed again as I exhaled. I thought of Arthur, my husband, gone 10 years now. He used to say, "Kindness doesn't mean blindness, Irene. It just means you know when to open your eyes." I wished he were here to see mine open now. In the reflection on the monitor, I could see my own face, older, thinner, but steady. The same woman who once stayed up all night balancing farm ledgers by hand. The same woman who nursed her husband through cancer and her son through heartbreak. And now, the same woman who would not be erased by a daughter-in-law's ambition. I reached for my phone again, opened my notes, and typed one line. October 15, she tried to sell my farm. Then another line, slower this time. They don't know I hold their mortgage. My pulse steadied. My fear drained into focus. I wasn't angry, I was awake. When Daniel visited that afternoon, he brought flowers and guilt. He kissed my forehead without meeting my eyes. "You scared us, Mom. Lila's been handling everything while you rest. She's amazing, really." Amazing. Yes, in the way a storm can look beautiful from a distance before it flattens everything you love. I smiled. "That's good, dear. I trust she's keeping busy." He nodded, relieved by my calm. He had no idea my phone lay under the blanket, still recording, every word another nail in the coffin of their secret plan. When he left, I turned to the window again. The light had softened. In that golden hue, I whispered, not to anyone, but to myself, "They think silence is surrender. It never was." Because this wasn't the first time someone mistook my quiet for weakness, and it would not be the last time silence became my armor. Later that night, a young nurse named Clara came to change my IV. She was kind, gentle, maybe 23. She noticed the phone in my lap and smiled shyly. "Are you recording voice notes, Mrs. Whitmore?" "Just memories," I said. "It helps me remember who I am." "You're the farm lady on Highway 12, right? My grandma buys your corn every summer, says it tastes like the old days." Her words broke something tender inside me. I nodded. "Tell her I said thank you." As she left, I realized that maybe the world still remembered decency, even if my family didn't. That thought steadied my hands. When morning came, I sat upright, pain stabbing with each breath, and opened the small notebook I kept in my purse. Arthur's old leather ledger, edges soft from decades of use. Inside, his handwriting curled across yellowed pages, numbers, crop yields, rental payments, quiet empires built in silence. And tucked at the back, a photocopy of the Stanton mortgage. I traced the signature, Martha's neat cursive, and smiled sadly. 6 years ago, when her husband lost his job at the mill, I had bought the note from the bank to keep them from losing their home. I never told them. I never expected gratitude. That was the thing about good deeds done quietly. They stay pure until someone tries to dirty them. Now I knew what had to be done. No arguments, no shouting, only preparation. I will recover. I would go home. And when the time came, I would show them that silence was never the absence of power. It was the gathering of it. The camera fades on Irene's face as she closes the ledger. The hospital beeps fade into the soft hum of a heartbeat returning to normal. Voiceover. I wasn't angry anymore, just awake. Some people mistake peace for surrender. They forget. Storms look calm from a distance. When I finally came home from the hospital, the air felt different. Not cleaner, not colder, just quieter. The kind of quiet that waits, not peace, but pause. From the hill above the driveway, I saw the Whitmore farm stretched out in gold. 200 acres of corn, each stalk swaying like it had been waiting for me to open my eyes. The barn roof had rusted at the corners. The windmill still turned with a soft creak. Arthur's old radio sat in the window of the porch, its antenna bent like an old man bowing to time. I stood there for a moment, hand on the railing, and thought, this is what people call nothing. And yet it raised everything I ever loved. Inside, the smell of wood polish and soil greeted me like memory itself. I sat in Arthur's chair by the window and let my hand drift over the armrest. His favorite mug still sat on the table, a ring of coffee long dried at the bottom. No one had dared move it, not even Daniel. Arthur used to say, "The land never betrays the one who tends it." At 20, I thought he meant corn and soybeans. At 70, I knew he meant people. That the same discipline it takes to grow a crop can also hold a family together. The land rewards care. People reward love. Both die when neglected. I reached for the ledger book, the same one I'd opened in the hospital. Its leather cover was cracked from years of weather, and the ink inside had turned brown at the edges. Arthur had written every expense, every harvest, every payment made and received by hand. There were smudges where his thumb had rested. His patience was pressed into every page. That book had outlived him, and in a way, it had outlived me too. It was late afternoon when Daniel's car pulled up, kicking dust into the sunlight. The tires made that same gravel sound Arthur loved. He used to say it was the music of coming home. Now it only reminded me of distance. Lila stepped out first, high heels on dirt, an unnatural sound. She looked at the farmhouse as though she had stumbled onto an old photograph that didn't fit her filter. Her voice carried across the yard, bright and disbelieving. It's quaint. Like something from the Dust Bowl documentary. Daniel tried to laugh, but it came out like a cough. Mom wanted us to stop by before we before we check the fields. I smiled, but inside I felt that small tear of understanding. They had already talked about selling, the appraiser, the offer, and yet they came pretending it was a visit. "Welcome home," I said softly. "The house has missed your noise." Lila blinked, not sure if it was humor or reproach. Maybe both. She looked around the porch, the peeling paint, the old rocking chair, the wind chime made from mason jar lids, and gave a polite, hollow smile. "I forgot how rustic it is." Rustic. That was the word city people used when they didn't want to say poor. I offered her tea. She asked if I had almond milk. When I said no, she declined politely, scrolling through her phone to check the signal. The silence between us was thicker than any storm cloud. In that silence, I remembered the first day Arthur brought me here. The year was 1974. The fields were small then, the barn half rotted. We had nothing but 2 hands, a loan, and a promise. He said, "You'll hate it at first. The wind never stops and the work never ends, but it'll make you strong." He was right. We built everything ourselves, the fence posts, the kitchen cabinets, even the bed frame. Our hands were our currency, our faith, our insurance. We measured time by harvest, not calendars. The neighbors called us stubborn. I called it devotion. When Daniel was born, we buried his umbilical cord beneath the oak tree by the barn. Arthur said it would tie him to the land. Maybe it tied him too tightly. Maybe that's why he's always torn between the soil that raised him and the woman who despises it. I watched Lila wander through the living room, taking pictures on her phone. She wasn't cruel, she was just lost in a different kind of world. Every frame, every floorboard looked like a relic to her. To me, they were proof. Proof that love, when planted deep, doesn't die. It just waits. "Do you ever think about downsizing, Irene?" she asked, voice syrupy. "A place in town might be easier for you." I turned toward her, steady and polite. "Easier isn't always better, dear. Some things are meant to be hard." "That's how you know they matter." She didn't reply. She just smiled the way people smile when they think they've already won. Daniel avoided my eyes. His shirt was city clean, his hands no longer calloused. I wanted to reach for him, but love feels heavier when you have to carry it alone. After they left that evening, I walked the edge of the field alone. The sun sank low, setting the rows of corn ablaze in orange. Crickets hummed under the fence line, and the wind pushed my hair back from my face. Arthur used to say the wind was the land breathing. That night, it felt like he was still breathing with me. I stopped by the barn door, resting my hand against the wood. The paint was peeling, but beneath it, the same boards Arthur nailed stood solid. Everything that looked broken still held. Maybe that was my lesson too. Inside, I found the old radio. When I turned it on, static filled the air before a soft, crackling tune came through, some country ballad from decades ago. The melody carried through the rafters like a prayer for what once was. I sat down on the stool, ledger book in my lap, and flipped to the last page Arthur wrote before he died. In his looping handwriting were 4 words: "The land remembers kindness." I traced them with my thumb, the ink rough beneath my skin. Maybe that was why I had never foreclosed on the Stantons' house. Maybe that was why I still believed decency was worth more than profit. But decency, I was learning, was a fragile seed. It dies when planted in ungrateful soil. The next morning, I brewed coffee before the sun rose. The house creaked as if stretching awake. Through the window, I saw Daniel's car drive away toward town. Lila's voice carried faintly through the open field. She was talking on speakerphone again. Yes, the place is massive. Outdated, but massive. We'll have to repaint everything before showing it. My grip tightened on the mug. She spoke as if it were already hers to sell. I set the cup down gently, not a drop spilled, and whispered, "The land never betrays, but people do." The wind blew through the window just then, flipping the ledger's pages on the table. They landed on a page with a number I knew by heart, the Stanton mortgage. And there it was, in my husband's handwriting, the first payment received from her father's account. The ink had faded, but the truth hadn't. I smiled, slow and steady. The world thought the Whitmore farm was dying. They didn't know its roots ran deep enough to pull them all back to the surface when the time was right. Daniel came back the next weekend with paint swatches in his jacket pocket and a realtor's card tucked discreetly between them. Lila arrived 5 steps ahead, carrying a ring light and the smile of someone who had already imagined the thumbnail. I was at the sink, rinsing mason jars, when the light flared behind me. Our kitchen, the same one Arthur built by hand, turned into a stage of net. Farm aesthetic. Week 3, Lila announced to her phone. This is the legendary heirloom kitchen everyone talks about. Solid wood, solid history, solid reasons to say goodbye. Her camera lingered on the pine table, the one Arthur carved 40 years ago. Her manicured finger traced a deep groove, a scar from the day he sliced bread too quickly. To her, it was texture. To me, it was a memory. I dried my hands on a towel, keeping my tone calm. That table held birthday cakes and storms. She smiled without lowering the camera. And dust, she said. Daniel stepped into the frame, hands buried in his pockets. Babe, maybe film the porch instead. The light's better outside. The light is perfect right here, she replied. Viewers love real life. He nodded the way he always did. Half surrender, half habit. I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Not agreement, fear of conflict. I'd once hoped marriage would make my son braver. Instead, it had taught him to be careful. Lila panned the camera across the stove, its enamel chipped where I'd scrubbed too long. Vintage charm, she said. Some things shouldn't survive every decade. I turned on Arthur's old radio. A soft guitar filled the room, cutting through the glare of her ring light. This radio has survived every decade, I said. Exactly, she smiled. The past never knows when to leave. She typed a caption, added a pop song I didn't recognize, and hit post. The ring light dimmed. Our kitchen returned to its true color. It felt like the house exhaled. An hour later, while she checked her phone, Daniel leaned against the doorframe. She's just trying to build her brand, Mom. It's harmless. Is it? I asked, letting the kettle whistle for me. He had no answer. He kissed my cheek and went outside to take a call. Minutes later, I heard Lila laugh. 50,000 views already, she said. People love transformation stories. She didn't see the irony. She wasn't transforming the house. She was erasing it. By the next week, the equipment multiplied. Tripods, foam mics, even a backdrop. She filmed a pantry tour while I labeled jars in Arthur's handwriting. This, she said to her followers, is what generational habits look like. Canning, couponing, making do. Her tone was sweet, polished, rehearsed. I looked at the row of peaches glowing in the afternoon light. She saw thrift, I saw legacy. That night, I checked the video. The comments poured in like rain on tin. Girl, you're brave for living like that. Sell it all and start fresh. Respectfully, this looks like a museum. A few gentle souls pushed back. My Nana's kitchen looks like this. It tastes like love. You can modernize without mocking. Lila's replies were quick, clean, brand safe. She never said my name. She didn't need to. The algorithm fills in what decency leaves blank. The next video featured my bedroom. I'd left the door open for air, not for her camera. Her lens caught the quilt on the bed, patches uneven from the winter Arthur fought cancer. She called it quaint. I called it endurance. By Sunday, a local account reposted her vlog. The views doubled, then tripled. That evening, Daniel handed me a postcard from the mail, a realtor's slogan in cursive. Swift sales, bold offers. He didn't sit. He hovered like a man waiting for judgment. "Mom, maybe it's time to consider safer options." I looked around my kitchen. There was no danger here unless you feared honesty. "Safety?" I said. "Is that what you call leaving a woman without her history?" He sighed. "She's trying to help me carry the load." "Then let her carry the truth," I said, "not an image." Later that night, I watched Lila's new upload. Her tone was confessional, her lighting soft. "There's nothing wrong with wanting more," she told her followers. "Sometimes leaving is love." Leaving can be love. It can also be convenient. I closed the video and opened the ledger. The smell of old paper was grounding. Arthur's handwriting looping through the margins like a prayer. A few days later, she filmed from her parents' porch. The white shutters gleamed behind her. "Back where it all started," she said. "When the mill closed, my parents lost almost everything. I promised myself I'd never be small again." For a moment, I softened. Loss makes kin of strangers. I saw in her the same hunger I'd once seen in myself, the kind that mistakes survival for shame. Through her camera, Martha waved from the doorway, her hands cracked from years of work. A mother who once scrubbed factory oil from her palms so her daughter could wear clean dresses. A daughter who now filmed kitchens to erase where she came from. I turned off the screen. Empathy, yes. Forgiveness, not yet. Back at the farm, Lila layered new footage over old. Our pantry shelves became a metaphor for cycles that need breaking. Her narration floated through the speakers. I am the one who ends the story of smallness. The story she sold was survival. The story she lived was inheritance. But I kept listening. Sometimes the best way to learn someone's truth is to let them talk long enough. By the following weekend, a brand sent her kitchenware. She unboxed it at my table, blades glinting under the light. "First collaboration," she beamed. "New beginnings." I wiped the table, careful not to scratch the surface or her illusion. "Beginnings need roots," I said quietly. She barely heard me. Later that afternoon, she opened a drawer and found my stack of papers, the property deeds and mortgage records. She lifted one page and laughed. "Paperwork, paperwork, the elderly love it." I took it gently from her hand. "The elderly love receipts," I said. "They protect truth from rumor." For a second, her eyes met mine. Something flickered. Recognition, maybe guilt. But it vanished when the phone rang. That evening, through the open window, I heard her talking to someone. "I know she's not the villain," she said softly, "but the narrative works. People engage. Views mean leverage." A pause. Then, "I'm tired of being the girl from the mill town. I'm tired of pretending I don't care about rooms I'll never be invited into." It was the truest thing she'd ever said, and still, truth doesn't excuse cruelty. I let her words pass through me like the weather. The next day, the montage changed tone. Upbeat music, fast cuts, my hand scrubbing the sink, captioned "Tradition." A poll appeared on screen. Should they sell the farm? Thousands voted yes. Strangers decided the fate of my home with a tap of their thumbs. That night, I left the ledger open on the table, not as a warning, as a reminder. Each line was a quiet spine of dignity. Arthur's patience, my endurance, the mortgage of a family who once needed mercy. Martha's signature repeated across the years like an echo of gratitude she never knew where to send. At dusk, Daniel joined me on the porch. He sat in silence, his body heavy with a guilt he couldn't name. Finally, he said, "She thinks the videos will help us. That if we look like a story worth saving, people will help." "Have you asked me for help?" I asked. He blinked. "I didn't want to burden you." "Being left out is a heavier burden," I said. He nodded, the way Arthur used to when he finally understood something without words. The windmill clicked in rhythm behind us. "Do you think Dad would hate the internet?" Daniel asked. "He'd hate mockery dressed as wisdom," I said, "and he'd love anything that told the truth." The next morning, I hung a small sign on the pantry door. Private. Filming only with permission. Lila recorded the sign, smiling into her lens. Healthy boundaries. she told her followers, learning to communicate. The comments praised her maturity. Irony, it seems, trends easily. By month's end, a local station invited her for an interview, modernizing rural life. She rehearsed answers in the living room while I shelled beans at the table. "We're not disrespecting the past," she said into her reflection. "We're choosing a future." The line was perfect, marketable. It didn't have to be true to sound wise. The beans clicked softly in the bowl, one by one, like seconds of patience. I looked at my hands, knuckles shaped by years of care. No spotlight, no filter, just truth under my nails. I never imagined filial duty could evolve into public embarrassment, that a son I raised on homemade bread would let my kitchen become a prop. But here we were, a family dinner for an audience that would never taste a thing. So I did what women like me have always done. I closed the bowl, closed the ledger, and closed my mouth, for now. Because silence, in the right hands, is not surrender. It is a strategy. And disrespect left to rise unchecked eventually burns itself in the oven light. Hospitals have a strange way of freezing time. The same beeping monitors, the same white curtains, the same conversations whispered too close to hope. After my second heart procedure, I drifted between sleep and memory, the two blending into something too quiet to trust. The nurses said I needed rest. Rest to me meant surrender. So I stayed still, but I did not sleep. The door creaked open late that afternoon. Perfume drifted in first, sharp and floral. Then the sound of a phone being set to speaker mode. "She'll be unconscious for days," Lila said. Her voice was soft, but with the careful confidence of someone performing for an invisible audience. My body didn't move. My fingers twitched against the blanket. I could tell she was pacing by the rhythm of her heels. "Once Daniel signs," she continued, "it's done. We'll finally move to Chicago. The realtor says the land's still hot, even with the zoning restrictions." A pause. Then Martha's voice, faint but certain, came through the speaker. "You're doing the right thing, sweetheart. That place is a museum for ghosts. Daniel's mother has lived too long in that illusion. You're helping him step into real life. Real life. That's what they called stripping a woman of her roots." My breath slowed. Careful. My pulse monitor betrayed me with every spike, so I focused on control. Slow inhale, slow exhale. "I just want to make sure she doesn't wake up before the papers are signed," Lila whispered. "The doctor said she might get disoriented after anesthesia. We'll tell her it's temporary, just a transfer of title for tax reasons. She won't even notice." Her tone softened again. "Mom, we could have a fresh start. A city apartment, my marketing job, Daniel's architecture career. No more cows, no more mud, no more pity." I wanted to scream. Pity? The word burned, but my throat refused to rise with it. I turned my head slightly, the IV tugging against my skin. My phone sat on the tray table, just within reach. It took all my strength to lift my hand. Every muscle felt like it belonged to someone else. Slowly, I slid my thumb across the screen. The red circle glowed. Record. My hand trembled, but the sound was steady. The phone captured every word. The betrayal, the plans, the tone of triumph she couldn't hide. It wasn't vengeance that guided my hand. It was instinct. A lifetime of believing that good people don't need proof has taught me the hardest lesson of all. Memory isn't enough to protect the truth. Lila laughed softly. "You should see this room, Mom. It's like time stopped in 1985. I can't even imagine what she's thinking, holding on to that farm like it's treasure." Martha chuckled on the line. "She doesn't think. She remembers. That's the problem with old people. They live in yesterday because they can't control tomorrow." My heart skipped. The monitor beeped louder. Lila froze for a second, lowering her voice. "I think the nurse is coming. I'll call you after I meet with the notary. Love you." "Love you, darling. Don't feel guilty. Progress always hurts someone." The call ended with a tone as sharp as a blade. Lila tucked her phone away and leaned over my bed. I could smell her perfume again. Jasmine and nerves. "Rest well, Irene," she whispered. "When you wake up, Things will be simpler." Her hand brushed my blanket, an imitation of affection. Then she was gone. The door closed, and the silence that followed was unbearable. I stared at the ceiling, trying to steady my breath. In that white, sterile light, I thought of Arthur. He used to say, "People mistake silence for permission, Irene. Don't let them." I closed my eyes and whispered to no one, "I won't." Hours passed. The nurses came and went, checking vitals, adjusting tubes, asking if I needed anything. I asked for a notepad and a pen. "Just to write down my thoughts," I said. The young nurse, Clara, the one who liked my corn, smiled and brought me one. When she left, I opened the notebook and began writing names. Lila Stanton Whitmore, Daniel Whitmore, Martha Stanton. Then, Harvest Valley Farm, 200 acres. Underneath, I wrote the date and the words, "Unauthorized sale attempt during medical incapacity." My handwriting was shaky but legible. I underlined it twice. Then I added one more line, smaller but heavier. "Proof exists." That night, I replayed the recording in secret. Her voice filled the room again, sharp and certain. "She'll be unconscious for days. Once Daniel signs, it's done." I memorized every syllable until it became part of my pulse. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I prayed, not for revenge, for clarity, for the strength to wait without breaking. The next morning, Daniel visited. He looked tired, half son, half stranger. He pulled up a chair and tried to sound cheerful. "Lila says you're recovering well, Mom." "That's good. You gave us quite a scare." "I'm tougher than I look," I said. My voice was hoarse but steady. He smiled with relief. "Good. Maybe once you're home, we can talk about updating some of the legal stuff, just to make sure everything's organized." I studied his face. He wasn't lying. He was repeating someone else's words planted carefully. "That's thoughtful of you, Daniel." I said. "You always liked order." He squeezed my hand, mistaking composure for consent. "It's what Dad would have wanted, to make sure you're safe." I smiled faintly. "Your father trusted people. I learned to trust paper." He didn't understand, not yet. He kissed my forehead and promised to bring soup next time. When he left, I stared at the door for a long time. There's a kind of grief that comes not from death, but from recognition. The moment you realize the child you raised is someone else's echo. That night, when the ward dimmed, I took the phone from under my pillow and played the recording again. Lila's words filled the quiet like cold wind through an open window. "She'll be unconscious for days. Once Daniel signs, it's done." My thumb hovered over the delete button. For a second, I wanted to erase it all, to pretend I hadn't heard what I'd heard. But then I saw Arthur's ledger in my mind, the neat handwriting, the balance columns, the way every truth had a place. So I saved it instead, backed it up, twice. Some people keep hope in prayers. I keep mine in documentation. The next morning, the doctor cleared me for discharge. Lila signed the paperwork with careful grace, smiling for the nurse's compliments. "Such a devoted daughter-in-law," someone said. She blushed modestly. "Family first, always." I watched her pen move, steady, precise. My pulse was calm, my eyes open, and beneath the blanket, my hand rested on the phone in my lap, still recording. As the wheelchair rolled me toward the elevator, I looked up at the hospital's glass ceiling. It reflected the sky, blue and endless. I whispered, just loud enough for myself, "They think I'm asleep." But I've never been more awake, because sometimes justice doesn't begin with confrontation. It begins with a red button, a trembling hand, and the quiet courage to remember everything. The morning I left the hospital, the air outside felt sharper, like the world had been washed clean while I was gone. Daniel stood beside the nurse at the curb, shifting from foot to foot. His nervousness filled the silence between us. Lila leaned against their car, face glowing under her phone camera's light. "We're taking her home today," she announced to her followers, voice bright and syrupy. "Grandma's on her way back to the farm, and we're starting renovations right away. New life, new beginnings." Her tone sparkled. It was a performance, one I had learned to watch the way a gardener watches for frost. Smiling politely, I let Daniel help me into the back seat. The seatbelt clicked. Her live stream continued. "We're turning this old farmhouse into something special," she said, panning the camera toward me. "Say hi, Irene." I smiled faintly at the lens. "Hello, dear. Don't let me keep you from your project." Her audience sent hearts and emojis across the screen. She thanked them sweetly, never noticing how I turned my phone face down on my lap. Recording again. Proof. Always. Quietly. The road home wound through fields I had known longer than she'd been alive. The barns, the fences, the trees bent by wind, all exactly as I'd left them. But the air carried something new, the scent of intrusion, of being watched. When we arrived, the porch was covered in boxes labeled renovation supplies. Lila leapt from the car, already narrating. "Okay, guys, let's start with the kitchen. I cannot wait to show you the before shots." She unlocked the door before I could touch the handle. Her camera swept across the entryway, catching the dust, the worn rugs, the light spilling through lace curtains. "See? Vintage charm. This is going to be such a transformation." Daniel followed with my overnight bag, guilt written on the slope of his shoulders. "Mom, I told her maybe wait until you rest, but..." "It's all right, Daniel," I interrupted gently. "I've rested enough." The kitchen looked exactly as I'd left it, sunlight pouring across the wood floor, the kettle waiting on the stove. Lila had already set up her ring light on the counter. "We'll repaint, replace the cabinets, and probably get rid of that old table," she said to the camera. "The goal is to make it feel modern, but keep a touch of authenticity." That word again, authenticity. She wielded it like paint thinner. I set my purse down and quietly filled the kettle with water. The old handle creaked the way it always had. Behind me, she was still talking, her voice rising and falling like a song I didn't want to know the lyrics to. When the kettle whistled, I poured the tea slowly, letting the steam fog my glasses. I didn't turn to her, didn't interrupt, didn't defend. I only listened. "We'll call this series Restoring the Past," she told her viewers, "because sometimes you have to rebuild before you can move forward." Her words hung in the air like a sermon to people who had never built anything themselves. Daniel sat down at the table, eyes flicking between me and his wife. "Mom," he said softly, "don't you think it's good? The house is getting some attention?" I looked at him. My son, who used to build birdhouses with Arthur, who once said sawdust smelled like home. Now he spoke like a man afraid of conflict, rehearsed by marriage. "Attention isn't the same as care," I said, "and noise isn't the same as progress." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Lila barely noticed. Her followers flooded the live stream with comments. "She's adorable. You should move her to the city. So retro." I stirred honey into my tea and smiled. Would anyone like a cup? Neither of them answered. They were too busy with the broadcast, and I was too busy memorizing the sound of their distraction. When the camera finally went off, Lila sighed in relief. "That went well. Engagement's up 20%. I nodded as if she'd told me about the weather. "That's good, dear. People like stories." "Exactly," she said brightly. "That's what I'm giving them. A story of transformation." "Be careful," I murmured, setting the teacup down. "Stories have a way of transforming the storyteller, too." She tilted her head, unsure if it was a compliment or a warning. Daniel reached for her hand, a peace offering neither of them understood how to use. I spent the afternoon in quiet motion. My body ached, but I moved slowly through the house, straightening, touching, remembering. I folded the kitchen towels Arthur loved, the ones with frayed edges and coffee stains. I adjusted the lace curtain over the sink, and then, from the old drawer by the window, I pulled out the linen tablecloth, the one I hadn't used since his funeral. Its edges were yellowed, but the center still shone white. I spread it across the table. Lila watched from her phone, puzzled. "You don't have to do all that, Irene. We're replacing the table anyway." "Then let it be dressed properly one last time," I said. My fingers smoothed every wrinkle until the fabric lay flat and unbothered. Then I reached for a vase and placed it in the center, a small glass jar filled with dried roses. Their petals were brittle, faded from red to gold. Arthur had given them to me our last summer together. They were dead, yes, but still beautiful. Lila frowned. Maybe fresh flowers would be better for filming. No, I said quietly. These are perfect. They know how to last. That silenced her for a moment. In that stillness, I saw myself reflected in the glass of the window, the scarf around my shoulders, the lines on my face, the calm that looked like surrender but wasn't. I didn't need them to know what I knew. I needed them to think I'd forgotten, because forgetting, when you choose it, is power. My narration echoed softly in my mind, the same way I would later tell it to you. I didn't need them to know I knew. I needed them to think I forgot. That was how you survive betrayal from your own table, by letting people underestimate the quiet woman pouring tea. Later that evening, Daniel brought me a blanket. Mom, maybe you should rest. You've done enough today. I've only just begun, I said gently. But you're right. I should rest. He smiled with relief, not catching the double meaning. He kissed my cheek before heading upstairs. When they were gone, I turned off the lights one by one. The house darkened, familiar shadows reclaiming their corners. I sat at the table, tracing the roses in the vase. One petal fell, curling at the edge like a secret that couldn't stay buried. I caught it before it touched the tablecloth and tucked it inside the ledger book. A keepsake, a timestamp, proof that beauty and decay can coexist without apology. Outside, the wind rustled through the fields. The same sound that had lulled me to sleep beside Arthur decades ago. Back then, silence had been comforting. Now, it was armor. I took a slow sip of tea, letting its warmth settle in my chest. Some wars begin with shouting. Mine began with restraint, because the truth doesn't always need to be shouted to be heard. Sometimes it only needs to be written down, backed up, and waited on. And so, I waited. The kettle cooled. The roses leaned toward the window light, and I whispered to the empty room, "They think I'm fading, but this is what blooming looks like when you've learned to be quiet." Night arrived quietly, the way it always does on the farm, without ceremony, just a slow surrender of color. The lights in the kitchen glowed amber, soft and forgiving. Lila and Daniel had gone upstairs, their laughter muffled through the old ceiling boards. I sat alone at the table, the dried roses at my elbow, my teacup cooling beside the ledger. The house was breathing again. It was time. I rose, slow but steady, and walked to the study. The key to the safe hung behind Arthur's photograph, hidden in plain sight like all important things. I pulled the frame slightly to the side. The small brass key swung forward and caught the light. The lock clicked open after years of silence. Inside were documents older than Lila, thicker than her ambition. Arthur's handwriting peeked from every envelope, and there, beneath the insurance files and tax papers, rested what I had come for: the black leather ledger and a folder marked Whitmore Holdings, LLC. The metal lamp hummed when I turned it on. Golden light washed over the desk, over decades of quiet work that no one in this house had ever truly understood. Arthur had called this room the study. I used to call it the vault of our better angels. I opened the ledger, and there he was again, his handwriting steady, looping, patient. Each line is a record of integrity: names, amounts, dates, interest percentages. Not greed, not control, just responsibility. Arthur and I had started Whitmore Holdings, LLC 30 years ago. Not because we dreamed of power, but because we'd seen too many good farmers lose everything when the banks came knocking. The system was built to break people like us, hardworking, honest, but one drought away from ruin. Arthur's idea was simple. If we can't change the weather, Irene, we can at least change the terms. So we pooled what little we had and began buying debts, not to collect them, but to protect them. When neighbors fell behind, we quietly purchased their liens from the banks. We'd lower the interest, let them pay what they could, and when they finally got back on their feet, we'd hand them the deed with no fanfare. No one ever knew. That was Arthur's rule. Kindness, he said, works best when it doesn't need credit. I turned to another page. Each entry carried a story I could still remember by heart. March 2018, Henson Dairy, paid off loan, Deed returned. June 2020, Miller family. Storm loss forgiveness. October 2023, Stanton mortgage. Foreclosed property bought to prevent eviction. $122,000. I stopped at that line. My finger hovered over it. Stanton mortgage. Martha and Richard Stanton. Lila's parents. The words on the page blurred slightly before my eyes refocused. It has been nearly 2 decades since that entry. The mill had closed, the family had lost their savings, and their bank had been ready to take their home. Arthur had bought the mortgage quietly through Whitmore Holdings. He told me, "They've got kids. They just need a second chance." We never told the Stantons who had stepped in. We never told anyone. After Arthur died, I had kept the payments running through the company accounts. The Stantons had faithfully paid each month, never late, never knowing whose hand steadied their roof above them. And now their daughter wanted to sell the land that built the very company holding their debt. I leaned back, staring at the line in the ledger until the ink seemed to breathe. The irony wasn't poetic, it was mathematical. Debt, payment, mercy, ignorance, they'd all come home in perfect symmetry. I reached for the Whitmore Holdings folder and spread its contents across the desk. Business licenses, bank statements, corporate seals. My name beneath Arthur's, the joint signatures of 2 people who had built a safety net so wide that even the ungrateful were still standing on it. Somewhere in the papers was a copy of the Stanton mortgage deed, current balance, address, and terms. There it was, unpaid principal, $28,400. Maturity date, January 2032. Holder, Whitmore Holdings, LLC. I traced the embossed seal with my thumb. Their home, the White House with blue shutters where Lila filmed her visits, belonged in full legal title to me. I turned off the lamp and sat in the darkness for a while, the papers spread before me like a quiet confession. Outside, the wind shifted, rattling the shutters. Somewhere in the barn, an owl called. My voiceover, if you could have heard it, would have sounded the way truth does when it finally stops hiding. I never wanted power. I wanted fairness. But sometimes, responsibility and power are the same thing. I remembered the day Arthur drew up the first mortgage contract. He'd sat at this same desk, glasses slipping down his nose, ink smudging on his thumb. "You realize, Irene," he said, "this gives us control over people's lives." "Then we'll use it gently," I told him. He smiled, kissed my hand, and said, "That's why it should be you who signs it." I'd laughed back then, shyly, believing responsibility was just another word for goodness. Now I know better. Responsibility is goodness with teeth. The clock on the wall ticked softly. I poured myself another cup of tea. Cold now, but steadying. On the corner of the desk sat Arthur's photograph, his face sun-worn and patient. "You left me the tools," I whispered to him. "Now I'll use them." The words didn't sound like revenge. They sounded like arithmetic finally balancing. I spent the next hour reviewing every folder, making sure the paper trail was intact. Whitmore Holdings wasn't just a company, it was a quiet fortress. We owned 5 rental properties in town, 3 farmland parcels across the county, and held mortgages on 7 local residences, including the Stantons. Arthur's foresight had turned compassion into infrastructure. I smiled faintly. Lila had mocked me for living in the past, not realizing the past was still paying her parents' bills. When the clock struck midnight, I began to write a letter, not to her, not yet to myself, a kind of legal will and moral inventory combined. "If the time ever comes when kindness must defend itself, this record shall speak," I wrote. "Let no one say I acted from vengeance. Let it be known I acted from stewardship." The pen left a small ink blot on the page. It looked like a heart. I tucked the letter into the folder, placed the ledger on top, and locked the safe again. The brass key felt warm in my palm. Before I replaced the photo, I paused and looked once more at Arthur's face. "You'd laugh at me for being dramatic," I whispered, "but you'd understand." When I stepped back into the kitchen, the kettle light blinked faintly in the dark. I sat down at the table again, the dried roses catching the last of the lamplight. A petal fell, landing beside the empty teacup. The silence was thick, but no longer heavy. It felt purposeful. Because now I wasn't just a widow with memories. I was the quiet owner of a truth that could unmake every lie they'd built. Outside, the windmill turned lazily against the night. I could almost hear Arthur's voice riding the wind. "The land remembers kindness, Irene." Yes, I thought. And sometimes kindness remembers who forgot it. I folded my hands on the table, calm as his prayer. Tomorrow, I will visit the county office. I would verify the Stanton's balance, the payment history, and the renewal terms. No confrontation, no threat, just documentation. Let Lila keep filming her renovation dreams. Let Daniel think I was healing. The power of silence lies in what it doesn't reveal. The night ended the same way it began, with light. A thin gold line stretched across the horizon, not sunrise, but the porch light reflecting off the ledger's edge through the open safe door. I closed the safe one last time and whispered, "Sleep well, Arthur. I'll handle it from here." Morning sunlight spilled across the kitchen table, landing on the ledger where I'd left it the night before. The air smelled faintly of rain and old paper. Somewhere upstairs, I heard Lila laughing softly on a call, her tone sweet and performative. Daniel's footsteps moved from room to room, restless. I closed the ledger and slid it into my bag. It was time to visit someone who understood both law and conscience. Mrs. Grant's office was in town, in the same brick building that had once been the post office. The sign on her door still read, "Eleanor Grant, Attorney at Law." She had been Arthur's friend for 40 years, the kind of woman who wore pearls, even to milk a cow. When I entered, she looked up from her desk, glasses perched low. "Irene Whitmore," she said with a slow smile. "You're a sight for sore eyes." And here I was, thinking you'd finally decided to let the world run without you. "It's running all right," I said, "just in the wrong direction." She gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit. You sound like you've come carrying more than paperwork." I placed the folder on her desk, the embossed Whitmore Holdings LLC seal catching the morning light. Her eyebrows rose slightly. "I haven't seen that name in years." "Arthur's creation," I said softly, still breathing. Eleanor leaned back. "Then this must be serious. What's happening?" I told her. About the hospital, about the phone call, about the planned sale, about the recording. She didn't interrupt once. Her pen moved silently, her face unreadable. When I finished, she tapped the end of her pen against the folder. "You've got them cornered, Irene. Legally, ethically, every which way. What do you want me to do?" I looked at her, the question heavier than it sounded. "Nothing," I said finally. "Not yet." She frowned slightly. "Then why come to me?" "Because I want everything ready," I said. "When I do speak, I want the truth to stand on its own 2 feet. I don't want emotion or pity or spectacle. I just want facts, signed, stamped, and witnessed." Eleanor smiled faintly. "That's not revenge you're describing, that's the order." "They think I'm weak," I said. "I want them to understand what patience looks like when it has proof." She poured us both coffee, the way she used to for Arthur and me when we visited years ago. "You know," she said slowly, "I always admired how you and Arthur built that company. Most folks thought it was just for tax protection." "Arthur wanted to protect people," I said. "He believed fairness was a kind of wealth." "And what do you believe?" I looked down at the steam rising from my cup. I used to think mercy was infinite. Now I think mercy has to be rationed, like water in a drought. Eleanor nodded. "So what exactly are you asking me to prepare?" I took a breath. "I want the full file on the Stanton mortgage notarized, updated, and certified as current. I want all property records cross-referenced with my medical proxy and power of attorney documents. And, she pressed, I want a contingency letter drafted. If anything happens to me before this is settled, that letter should go directly to the county registrar and to the Stantons' creditors. I want the paper trail to be unbreakable." Eleanor whistled softly. "That's a lot of foresight, Irene. Are you planning to tell them?" "Eventually," I said, "but not yet. People listen differently when silence precedes truth." She studied me for a long moment. "I have to ask," she said. "What do you want from them in the end? An apology? Restoration? Or just peace?" The question lingered between us. I thought of Lila's smirk in the hospital, Daniel's uncertain eyes, the laughter echoing in rooms built by hands that would never hold a phone again. If I wanted revenge, I could have acted already, I said. But Arthur raised me to believe that punishment isn't ours to give. It's just the shadow cast by consequence. "That's a beautiful line," she said softly. "But Irene, sometimes consequences need a push." I smiled faintly. "Then I'll give it a gentle one." When I left her office, the sky was low and gray, a thin drizzle coating the pavement. I stood by my car for a while, letting the rain soak through my sleeves. Moral clarity, Arthur used to call it, the place between justice and mercy where both hurt equally. I wasn't sure if I stood there now or if I had already stepped past it. As I drove home, the question kept circling. If Arthur were alive, would he want me to use the truth as a weapon? The answer shifted with every mile. Back at the farm, the air smelled of wet soil. Through the window, I saw Lila filming again, her voice echoing through the yard. "We're updating the kitchen floor next week and maybe tearing out that weird pantry thing." Weird pantry. Arthur built that pantry during the drought of '82 when we couldn't afford cabinets. Every plank was reclaimed wood from a neighbor's collapsed barn. I walked into the living room and sat down, the weight of the folder pressed against my lap. Inside it was every signature, every stamp, every record of decency they would soon have to face. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea and the wind pressing softly against the glass. Daniel came in quietly, sitting across from me. "Mom," he said, "Lila told me you've been going through Dad's old things. That must be hard." "Not hard," I said. "Necessary." He shifted in his chair. "She just wants to help. She says the farm is a burden for you." "It's not the farm that's heavy," I said. "It's people forgetting what built it." He looked away. "You're angry." "No," I said calmly. "Anger is loud. What I feel is quiet." He didn't know how to answer that. When he left the room, I whispered to myself, if Arthur were here, he'd tell me to forgive. But forgiveness without understanding is just surrender. Before bed, I wrote in my journal, a habit I'd taken up again since the hospital. Some truths must be carried until the right moment to release them. Speak too soon and they sound bitter. Speak too late and they sound like regret. The words steadied me. I closed the notebook, tucked it under the ledger, and turned off the light. 2 days later, Eleanor called. "Everything's ready," she said. "Documents notarized and secured. Your contingency, letters sealed in my safe." "Thank you," I replied. "You've always known when to trust silence." "And you've always known when to break it," she said. "Just promise me something, Irene. When you do decide to act, make sure it's for peace, not proof." Her words lingered long after the call ended. That evening, I walked outside. The fields were silver under the moonlight. The air was cool, sweet, and full of memories. Standing at the edge of the property, I looked toward the horizon where the Stanton home stood, its roof faintly visible through the trees. I imagined Lila's parents sitting in their kitchen, unaware that their daughter's greed rested on the mercy of the woman she mocked. It wasn't the satisfaction I felt. It was something quieter, like holding a secret too big for vengeance. "Arthur," I murmured, "would you call this justice? Or just survival?" The wind didn't answer, but the trees swayed, as if bowing to something larger than both. When I returned inside, the house was dark except for the faint glow from the lamp in Arthur's study. I sat at his desk once more, the ledger open before me. For the first time, I didn't see numbers. I saw choices. Every line, every loan, every mercy was a doorway. Arthur had built them all. Now it was up to me to decide which one to walk through. My hand rested on the page. "I never asked for power," I whispered. "I only asked to do what's right." The voice in my mind answered, calm and familiar. "Sometimes, Irene, they're the same thing." And with that, I knew the waiting was almost over. Dinner that night was Lila's idea. She called it a family evening, simple and warm. The table was set perfectly. Linen napkins, 2 candles, her phone perched upright like a third guest, recording the entire performance. I sat at the end, hands folded in my lap. The smell of rosemary chicken filled the kitchen, though I barely tasted it. Daniel poured wine, his silence louder than any prayer. Lila smiled wide, rehearsed. I thought we should all be together tonight. It's time to talk about the future, our family's future. Her tone was syrup over steel. She tapped her iPad awake and spun it around, revealing a slide deck titled Whitmore Farm Redevelopment Proposal. So, she began brightly, this is the offer from the development firm. They want to buy the entire property, 200 acres, for subdivision. They'll pay market value, maybe higher since it's prime land. Daniel and I could finally move to Chicago. It's what we've dreamed about. Her manicured finger traced imaginary progress across the screen. They'll build eco-homes, a wellness retreat, keep part of the barn as a heritage aesthetic. Isn't that wonderful? I sipped my tea slowly, letting the sound of the spoon against porcelain cut through her voice. Daniel cleared his throat. Lila, maybe we should... Honey, she interrupted, this is exciting news. We've all wanted to modernize, right? I looked at her. Calm, not angry, just aware. You've been busy, I said softly. She beamed. You taught me well. Organization, preparation, and you deserve comfort, Irene. We could find you a nice condo near the lake. You wouldn't have to deal with chores or, solitude. Her voice trailed off just enough to sound compassionate, but the pity underneath was a sharp blade. I placed the teacup down gently. The porcelain gave a tiny clink. That sound, small, clean, final, shifted the air in the room. Lila, I said, this land isn't for sale. She blinked, caught off guard for the first time that evening. I don't think you understand, Irene. You're not well enough to maintain it. Daniel agrees it's too much. Daniel's hand tightened around his glass. He didn't speak. I looked at both of them, one after the other, the way a mother looks before she draws a line that can't be erased. No, I said softly. You don't understand. This land is not for sale. And if you need to know why... I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope. Thick, cream-colored. I slid it across the table toward her. You'll find your answer in there. Her fingers hesitated before touching it. The paper crackled faintly in her grasp. What is this? She asked, laughing nervously. Documentation, I said, since you love contracts so much. She opened the flap and unfolded the first page. Her eyes scanned it once, twice. Her lips parted slightly, color draining from her face. This is a mortgage statement, she whispered. Correct, I said. Your parents' mortgage. The one they've been paying for nearly 20 years. She looked up, startled. How do you have this? Because, dear, I said evenly, they've been paying me. The silence that followed was the kind that only truth can make. Daniel froze, his wine glass suspended midair. Lila blinked rapidly, disbelief clawing at her composure. That's impossible. My parents would still be homeless, I said, if Arthur and I hadn't stepped in when the bank foreclosed. We bought their mortgage through Whitmore Holdings. They've paid every month since. I've kept every receipt, every kindness. The flicker of the candle caught the tremor in her hand as she lowered the paper. So you're saying you own my parents' house? Legally, yes. Morally, I've simply been their guardian. But now that you've tried to sell the soil that built your family's second chance, I thought it was time you understood where your comfort came from. She swallowed hard, words dissolving before they reached her lips. Daniel finally spoke, his voice small. Mom, why didn't you ever tell us? Because decency doesn't need applause, I said, and gratitude can't be taught. It's revealed. The air between us tightened, fragile but electric. I could see the exact moment Daniel's confusion turned into realization. His eyes softened, shame mixing with something else, respect. Lila sat back, trying to compose herself. You're using this against me, she said, voice trembling. "That's cruel." "No," I replied. "Cruelty is taking without asking. I'm simply showing you what's been hidden in plain sight." I leaned forward, my hands folded neatly on the table. "I don't want your apology. I don't need your gratitude. I just need you to understand that this land, this home, was never a burden. It was salvation for your parents, for my family, and for you, if you'd let it be." She shook her head, tears of frustration glinting at the corners of her eyes. "You're doing this to humiliate me." "No," I said softly. "I'm doing this to stop you." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They landed with precision. Calm, heavy, irrevocable. For a long time, no one spoke. Only the ticking of the old clock filled the room. I reached for my tea again, the movement deliberate. The spoon touched the cup, another soft clink. "You see," I said gently, "I don't take what isn't mine, but I also don't allow anyone to take what's mine." I let the silence breathe, the way Arthur used to after saying something he knew would outlive him. Lila's shoulders dropped. She looked smaller somehow, stripped of her usual armor of words and filters. Daniel's eyes met mine, and for the first time in years, he looked at me not as an obstacle, but as his mother. A quiet understanding passed between us. It didn't erase the hurt, but it anchored something steadier. Respect reborn. Lila pushed the papers aside. Her voice cracked. "So what happens now?" "Now?" I said. "Nothing happens. You'll stay here as long as you wish. You'll breathe the same air your parents were given. And maybe, in time, you'll remember that mercy isn't weakness." She stared at the mortgage, lips trembling. The iPad screen beside her had gone dark. The redevelopment slides, a vision of her imagined triumph, faded to black. "You recorded the call, didn't you?" she whispered suddenly, eyes narrowing. "Yes," I said simply, "and the law calls that evidence." Her mouth fell open slightly, but I smiled. Kindly, not cruelly. "Don't worry, dear. It's not for the police. It's for history, because lies deserve to meet the truth eventually, even if it's in private." The storm outside had grown louder, rain striking against the windows. The candlelight flickered, bending shadows across the room. For a brief second, we looked like a family frozen in a painting, each of us framed by our choices. I reached for the vase of dried roses, turning it slightly toward the light. Arthur used to say, "The same land remembers kindness." I think it also remembers betrayal. But forgiveness? It remembers that too. I rose from the table, steadying myself with both hands. "Dinner's getting cold," I said softly. "Eat while it's still warm." Then I left the room. In the hallway, I could still hear their voices, quiet, uncertain. Lila whispered something to Daniel, Daniel answering in short, halting words. But beneath it all, there was something new. Silence that wasn't indifference. It was a reflection. When I reached the top of the stairs, I paused and looked back. Through the doorway, I saw Lila staring at the envelope, her thumb tracing the embossed seal as if it might burn. Daniel was watching her, not with anger, but with a look that said, "Now you see her." The old farmhouse creaked softly, as though exhaling after years of tension. Later, when the house finally settled into stillness, I sat at my desk and opened my journal again. I wrote one line, careful and measured. "Power doesn't change who you are. It reveals who you've always been." I closed the book and set it beside the ledger. Outside, the rain had stopped. The earth was breathing again. I let my eyes close, the echo of the evening replaying in my mind. Lila's stunned silence, Daniel's dawning respect, the gentle clink of a teacup that had marked the turning of tides. Sometimes justice doesn't shout. It just sits at the head of the table and waits for everyone to realize it's already there. It didn't take long. 2 days after the dinner, the storm arrived, not from the sky, but from the internet. Lila posted a video titled, "Toxic Mother-in-Law Stops Our Dream." Her face appeared angelic on screen, eyes glistening just enough to look wronged. Soft piano music played in the background. "We tried so hard to modernize the family farm," she said, voice trembling. "But some people just can't let go of control. It's heartbreaking to watch your husband's dreams die because of pride." She dabbed her eyes delicately. "We just wanted a better life. We wanted to build something beautiful, but she—" Her voice cracked. She refused. Then the image cut to clips of the farmhouse, dim lighting, old cabinets, peeling paint. She filmed the same kitchen where I'd poured tea, turning it into a backdrop for tragedy. Underneath, captions read, "Sometimes love means walking away from toxicity." Within hours, the video went viral. The internet did what it always does, divided itself neatly between saints and villains. Half the commenters called her brave. "Good for you, girl, boundaries matter. Old people never understand growth. Sell that land and start your life." The other half defended me. "She raised your husband, show respect." "That woman built what you're standing on. You sound entitled, not oppressed." By morning, the post had 500,000 views and 1,000 arguments brewing. Under every line. Daniel came by the next evening, face pale. "Mom, please don't look at it," he said. "It's not as bad as it sounds, just people taking sides." "I know how people take sides," I said quietly. "They always do." He looked at me helplessly. "She's just emotional. She didn't mean for it to blow up like that." I smiled faintly. "When people can't control a story, Daniel, they make another one. That's how noise survives." He exhaled, rubbing his temples. "The comments are cruel. I told her to take it down, but you know how she is. She says the truth deserves to be heard." "Truth doesn't need hashtags," I said. "It just waits." He nodded, defeated. "She doesn't realize what she started." "She will," I said softly. That night, I made tea and sat in the glow of my laptop. The notifications blinked endlessly. Mentions, shares, angry emojis, tiny wars being fought by strangers over a story neither of them lived. I clicked play. Her video filled the screen again, her face framed perfectly, her tone trembling with sincerity. For a brief second, I didn't see malice. I saw fear, the kind of fear that comes from realizing you've bitten the hand that fed you and don't know how to make it right. The comment section was a battlefield. Someone had even found my Facebook page, leaving messages under old photos of Arthur and me. "You should be ashamed. Let your son live his life. Control freaks like you ruin families." I scrolled slowly, reading every word like a confession not meant for me but still written in my name. And then, after the 100th comment, I simply closed the laptop. The click of it shutting felt like the final note of a song I'd heard too many times. The next morning, the world was quiet again. I walked outside, the dew soft under my shoes. The fields shimmered gold, unbothered by online storms. The cows still grazed. The wind still hummed through the corn. I stood at the fence line looking at the horizon and realized the internet could invent 1,000 versions of me, but the soil beneath my feet knew the truth. There was peace in that thought, real, tangible peace. Not the kind you post about, the kind you live. Later, Clara, the young nurse from the hospital, stopped by with a pie. "I saw the video," she said carefully. "People can be awful online. I just wanted you to know not everyone believes her." "I don't mind belief," I said. "It changes nothing." She smiled softly. "You're stronger than I'd be." "Strength is just quiet practice," I said. Eventually, silence becomes armor. For the rest of the week, I didn't open my laptop. Daniel texted, Lila didn't. The farm continued as it always had. Rain fell on Tuesday. By Thursday, the ground drank it all. Every evening, I sat on the porch, watching the sun melt into the fields. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear laughter from the Stanton's house, the same family that had once been a heartbeat away from losing everything. Funny how mercy leaves echoes long after gratitude fades. A few days later, a neighbor stopped me in town. "Saw that video going around," he said awkwardly. "People are talking, but around here, we know better." I smiled. "Let them talk. Words are wind. The land outlasts all of it." He nodded. "Still, I must sting. Seeing your own daughter-in-law say those things." I paused, thinking. It only stings if you still expect decency. I don't expect any more. I observe. He chuckled softly. You've got a calm that scares people." "Good," I said. "Let them mistake peace for weakness. That's when they show who they are." That evening, when I came home, the sky was heavy with clouds. Thunder rumbled faintly over the hills. I poured a cup of tea, took it out to the porch, and watched the storm move in. For a moment, lightning split the sky wide open. The light flashed across the fields, the barn, the old oak tree by the fence line, all still standing, just as they always had. I whispered to myself, "The land remembers kindness. Let the world forget. It changes nothing." And when the rain began to fall, I didn't move. I let it wash over me. The storm outside, the storm online, both powerless against the calm I'd chosen. Because silence, when born from truth, doesn't retreat. It reigns. It was late morning when I heard the sound of tires crunching up the gravel drive. I wasn't expecting anyone. The mail had already come, and Daniel hadn't called. When I looked out the window, I saw a pale blue sedan, 10 years old, washed but weary. From it stepped Martha Stanton. She was smaller than I remembered from the few times we'd met at town gatherings, her shoulders rounded by apology, her hands twisting the strap of a worn purse. The moment I opened the door, her eyes filled with the kind of dread that doesn't come from anger, but shame. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said softly, voice trembling. I hope I'm not intruding. I just didn't know where else to go." "Come in," I told her. "You look cold." She hesitated on the threshold like a woman about to enter confession. The farm had that effect on people. It demanded honesty without ever asking for it. I guided her to the kitchen. The kettle was already half full from my morning tea. We sat at the same wooden table where her daughter had once argued for selling this land. Martha's eyes wandered over the dried roses, the ledger book, the soft light slanting through the lace curtains. "It's beautiful here," she whispered, "old but beautiful." "Age and beauty aren't enemies," I said. "They just stop competing." She gave a faint smile before her face tightened again. From her purse, she pulled out an envelope, creased, clutched too long. "I know you own the mortgage on our home," she said, the words stumbling out. "I found the letter from the county office. I just wanted to come and—" Her voice cracked. "Please, don't take our house. We didn't know what Lila was doing. We didn't know she'd hurt you. We didn't raise her that way." I let the kettle whistle once before turning off the flame. The sound filled the silence, then faded like a sigh. I set 2 cups on the table, poured tea, and said, "I'm not taking anything from you, Mrs. Stanton." Her eyes lifted, wide and wet. "But the mortgage will remain as it is," I said gently. "You've paid faithfully for years. Nothing changes." She pressed her trembling hands around the cup, as if holding warmth she didn't think she deserved. "Then why tell Lila?" "Because," I said, "I wanted her to understand the cost of forgetting where she came from." Martha looked down. Her voice became a whisper. "She's lost herself trying to look successful. Her father and we spoiled her, I think. We wanted her to have what we couldn't. But somewhere along the way, she began to think humility was weakness. Ambition isn't evil," I said. "It just becomes lonely when it stops being grateful." For a while, we drank in silence. The tea cooled between us. Outside, the wind brushed softly against the windows. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said after a long pause, "I don't know what to say except thank you for saving our home, for not humiliating her." I smiled faintly. Humiliation doesn't teach. Reality does. Her eyes met mine, tired, honest eyes, the kind that had worked too hard for too little. And in that moment, I saw what Lila might have been if she'd learned grace instead of vanity. Martha was her reflection, the version that remembered struggle, that still prayed before opening a bill, that knew dignity wasn't a gift but a practice. "You're a good woman," she said quietly. "Better than I would be in your shoes." "No," I replied, "just older. Age doesn't make us better, Mrs. Stanton. It just gives us fewer excuses." She laughed softly, a single tear sliding down her cheek. "You sound like my husband. He always said truth and kindness could share a room, but only if one learned to whisper. I nodded. Arthur used to say that too. We sat there, two widows bound by a shared language of loss and endurance. After a long pause, she reached into her purse again and pulled out a folded checkbook. I can pay extra this month, she said quickly. Please, let us make it right. There's nothing to make right, I told her. Debt isn't always about money. Then what is it about? Understanding, I said, and choices. Your daughter made hers. Now she'll have to live with the weight of knowing her comfort was built on my mercy. Her lips trembled. You're not going to tell the world? No, I said. I don't need to. Some truths grow louder in silence. The light shifted across the table as noon approached. I refilled her tea and changed the subject. Talked about weather, the church bazaar, her garden that always bloomed early. She relaxed a little, the stiffness leaving her shoulders. Before she left, she looked around the kitchen once more. It's funny, she said softly. This room feels like peace. Lila said it felt like a museum, but I see life here. That's the difference between inheritance and legacy, I said. Inheritance is what you take. Legacy is what you learn. Her eyes shone. I'll remind her of that, if she'll listen. One day she will, I said. Life has a way of humbling the loudest hearts. At the door, she stopped and turned to me. I came here afraid of you, she admitted, but now I think you're the only person who can still help her. She doesn't need help from me, I said. She needs silence from me. Sometimes the absence of confrontation is what makes people hear themselves. Martha nodded slowly, her expression full of both grief and gratitude. She reached out, taking my hand with a gentle squeeze. You've given us more than we deserve. Maybe, I said, but mercy is cheaper than revenge, and it lasts longer. When she drove away, I stood at the window until her car disappeared down the long gravel road. The kettle was still warm on the stove, the smell of tea and forgiveness lingering in the air. I sat back at the table, tracing a finger around the rim of my cup. The quiet had returned, but it no longer felt like solitude. It felt like purpose. I opened my journal and wrote one line. I didn't take anything from them. I only returned what they forgot to honor. Outside, the wind rustled the fields again, and the dried roses on the table leaned slightly toward the light, fragile, but still standing. And in that moment, I realized something Arthur had known all along. Some debts are best repaid in silence. It was a week after Martha's visit when Daniel came back to the farm. No call, no text, just the familiar sound of his old truck crawling up the drive like an apology on four wheels. I was pruning the rose bush by the porch when I saw him step out. His clothes were rumpled, his eyes hollow. There was no Lila beside him, only silence, carrying the weight of things finally understood. He stood there for a moment, hands in his pockets, before saying the words I had known were coming. Mom, can we talk? Always, I said. We sat in the kitchen, the same table where so many storms had begun and ended. The air smelled of earth and chamomile. The dried roses on the counter caught the afternoon sun, their shadows long and soft across the tablecloth. Daniel looked older than his years, tired, ashamed, but awake in a way he hadn't been since he was a boy. Lila moved out, he said. Finally. She's staying with her parents for now. I see. I needed to get some air, he continued, and I couldn't think of anywhere else to go. Then you came to the right place, I said quietly. The air here's still honest. He gave a small, broken laugh. Mom, I didn't know. About any of it. About Dad's company, about the mortgage, about you still managing the accounts. You weren't supposed to, I said. That was your father's wish. He wanted you to grow without the burden of money. He said wealth should be a surprise you don't need. Daniel's voice cracked. I thought you were struggling. I thought Lila and I were helping you. She told me you were living off savings. I was, I said, just not the kind you measure with numbers. He dropped his gaze, ashamed. I let her talk me into things. Selling, signing papers, all of it. I thought I was protecting you from your own stubbornness. Stubbornness, I repeated softly, smiling faintly. That's what they call conviction these days. He shook his head. I didn't see what she was doing. I didn't see you. I'm sorry, Mom." "You saw what love blinded you to," I said gently. "That's not a crime. It's just the price of learning." I rose and walked to the study. The safe door opened with its familiar click. From it, I retrieved Arthur's old ledger, the black one with frayed corners and coffee stains, still smelling faintly of ink and cedar. I placed it in front of Daniel. He looked at it with reverence, like a sacred text. "Dad's handwriting," he whispered, brushing his fingers over the first page. "I haven't seen this since I was a kid." "He kept everything in here," I said. "Every debt forgiven, every seed bought, every hand he helped without asking for thanks." Daniel turned the pages slowly. The sound of paper turning filled the silence like wind through leaves. Then he reached the final page, Arthur's last entry, written in his steady, looping hand. He read aloud, voice trembling, "If ever someone mocks the worth of kindness, let time be their teacher." He looked up at me, eyes glassy. "He wrote this the year I left for college." "Yes," I said. "He said someday you'd understand it better than anyone." Daniel's throat worked, but no words came. He simply closed the book and pressed it to his chest, as though holding his father's voice there might keep him from breaking. "I thought success meant outgrowing this place," he said finally. "But the truth is, this place outgrew me." "No," I said. "You just forgot its language for a while. But the land's patient. It always waits for people to remember how to listen." He wiped at his eyes, embarrassed. "You sound like Dad." "That's how I know he's still here." Later that afternoon, we went outside together. The sky was streaked with amber and violet, the kind of evening that reminds you time can heal what pride breaks. One of the fence posts near the pasture had come loose in last week's storm. Without speaking, Daniel fetched a hammer and nails from the shed. I steadied the board while he worked. The rhythm of the hammer echoed across the field, slow, deliberate, almost musical. Sweat darkened his shirt. Sawdust clung to his forearms. It was the first honest work I'd seen him do in years. When he was done, he stepped back and exhaled, looking at the line of fence stretching into the distance. "It's not perfect," he said. "Neither are we," I replied. "But it'll hold." He smiled for the first time that day. It was small, fragile, but real. We sat on the porch after that, sharing lemonade in quiet companionship. The wind rustled through the cornfields, carrying the faint scent of earth and renewal. He turned toward me, his face softer now. "Mom, what happens next?" "That depends on you," I said. "You can chase what's already gone, or you can rebuild what's still here." He stared into the distance. "I think I'd like to stay for a while. Fix the barn. Maybe help with the crops this season." "You remember how?" "You'll remind me," he said, smiling faintly. "I always do." As the sun dipped lower, I watched him stand, stretching his shoulders like someone shedding an old skin. He walked to the field, brushing his hand against the tall grass. For a moment, I saw him as a boy again, barefoot, laughing, chasing fireflies with Arthur's hat too big for his head. Now the same man stood where that boy had played, humbled, reborn. The years between them had been cruel, but the circle had closed. I whispered quietly, mostly to myself, "Welcome home, son." When he turned back toward me, the sunset caught his profile, half light, half shadow. The land glowed around him like it had been waiting for this very scene. "You know," he said, "Dad was right. Time really does teach." "It always does," I replied. "The trick is being humble enough to listen." We finished the day repairing another stretch of fence side by side. Our hands moved in rhythm, mine slower, his surer. Each nail sank into wood like punctuation, sealing not just a fence, but a fracture. When we were done, the sky had turned gold, the fields shimmered, and the barn doors creaked softly in the wind. He looked at me, eyes red but clear. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For not giving up on me." "Mothers don't give up," I said. "We just wait until you remember who you are." As the light faded, we stood together watching the horizon. Two figures, one old, one older in wisdom than in years, bound by the same soil, the same lesson, the same forgiveness. The land stretched before us, healed and whole again. The fence line stood straight, catching the last streaks of sun. And I thought of, Arthur's words once more. If someone mocks the worth of kindness, let time be their teacher. I looked at Daniel, his head bowed in quiet reflection, and knew time had done its work. It was a Tuesday morning when the envelope arrived. Plain white, no return address. The kind of letter that could hold either relief or reckoning. The bank's emblem was faintly embossed in the corner. I sat at the kitchen table, the same place where I'd once served Lila tea in silence, and slid a knife beneath the seal. Inside were 2 sheets of paper, one official, one trembling. The first was from the bank. Formal language, polite phrasing. Dear Mrs. Whitmore, we wish to inform you that the mortgage on the Stanton property has been paid in full, principal and interest cleared, liens released. Title to be returned to the owners within 10 business days. Sincerely, Midwest Agricultural Lending Services. I exhaled slowly. It was done. The ledger was clean now. No debts owed, no ties binding one family's mistake to another's mercy. I set the letter down, but another folded note slipped out. Lined paper, written in slanted ink that tried to stay steady and failed. The handwriting was familiar. It was Lila's. I unfolded it carefully. The ink had bled slightly at the edges, as if tears or rain had touched it. Mrs. Whitmore, I don't know how to start except by saying I'm sorry. I didn't understand what I was doing until I lost everything that mattered. I thought strength meant never admitting fault. I thought success was about how things looked from the outside. But now I know how small I became, trying to look big. My parents told me what you did. For them, for us, I don't deserve your mercy, but I needed you to know I finally saw it. Daniel told me about your husband's ledger. He said everything he built came from believing that dignity was worth more than money. I used to laugh at that. I don't anymore. If I could take back the things I said, I would. But I know forgiveness isn't a transaction. I just hope one day when you look out at your fields, you can remember me without anger. Thank you for not destroying us, even when you could have. Lila, I read it once, then again, and then I folded it in half, tracing the crease with my thumb. For the first time in months, my hands trembled, not from fury, not from frailty, but from something I hadn't felt in years. Release. There was no satisfaction in her apology, no victory in her regret, only stillness. Outside, a soft breeze stirred the curtains. Somewhere, Daniel's hammer rang faintly against wood, the steady rhythm of rebuilding. I reached for the old black ledger, Arthur's ledger, still resting on the shelf beside the window, the same book that had held our family's quiet legacy, the debts we forgave, the lessons we learned too late. I opened the last page. There, beneath Arthur's old line, if ever someone mocks the worth of kindness, let time be their teacher. I placed Lila's letter flat across the page, not to hide it, not to honor it, but to keep it among the truths that had shaped this farm, for better and worse. I wrote one line below her folded words, forgiven, not for her sake, but for mine. Then I closed the ledger gently, like tucking a child into bed. I made myself a cup of tea and carried it to the porch. The field stretched wide and gold under the morning light, patient as ever. In the distance, Daniel was mending another section of fence, his figure moving slow and sure. The kettle's steam brushed my face, and I thought about the word forgiveness. How people mistake it for weakness, when in truth it's the hardest work the heart can do. Arthur used to say forgiveness was like setting down a heavy stone after carrying it too long. You don't forget the weight, it shapes your hand forever, but you finally get to walk again. That morning, I placed the stone down. A truck passed by on the dirt road beyond the pasture. For a brief second, I thought it might be her, that maybe Lila would come to the door, asked to speak. But the truck drove on, leaving only dust and sunlight behind. And strangely, I felt no pain. Some goodbyes don't need to be said aloud. Some are just lived through quietly. Later that afternoon, Daniel came inside, wiping his hands on a rag. "Mom," he said, Someone left a delivery by the mailbox. No name on it. He placed a small box on the table, brown paper tied with twine. I untied it. Inside was a single item, a photograph in a wooden frame. It was the old family portrait, the one Lila had once mocked in her video, calling it a shrine to outdated pride. But this copy was clean, restored, framed anew. At the bottom edge, in tiny handwriting, someone had written, "To the family that still knows what home means." I didn't need to ask who sent it. Daniel looked at me carefully. Was it from her? I think so. He nodded slowly. What are you going to do with it? Hang it where it belongs, I said. He smiled. Dad would like that. So would I said. We hung it together above the mantel where it had once stood. The afternoon light fell across the frame, soft and gold, like time forgiving itself. That night, as I wrote in my journal, I realized how full the silence felt. Not empty, not heavy, just full of everything that didn't need words anymore. I thought of Lila, young, proud, frightened, trying so hard to outrun her own reflection. And for the first time, I didn't feel pity or anger, only understanding, because I, too, had once mistaken pride for strength. I, too, had learned the hard way that kindness isn't inherited. It's practiced, every day, like tending soil that doesn't always yield. Before bed, I returned to the ledger. I ran my fingers over the worn leather cover, the faint grooves of Arthur's handwriting pressed into its bound. It wasn't just a record of numbers. It was a map of values, of quiet choices that built a life. Inside it now lived one final entry, a daughter-in-law's apology, a mother's forgiveness, and the proof that mercy can end what punishment never could. I slipped a pressed rose between the pages before closing it, a flower once dried in grief, now reborn as a symbol of release. Standing by the window, I watched the moon rise over the barn. The fields glowed silver under its light, each stalk of wheat swaying gently like it was breathing. Arthur had once said, "The earth forgives every season, even the cruel ones." Maybe people can too. I whispered into the quiet, "Thank you, Arthur." The ledger's balanced now, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't mean money. As I turned off the lamp, I looked once more at the photo on the mantel, the family whole again, at least in memory. The kind of wholeness that doesn't erase the cracks, but lets the light through them instead. Forgiveness, I thought, isn't forgetting. It's setting the stone down so both hands are free to plant again. And tomorrow, that's exactly what I would do. The sun was sinking low when I stepped out onto the porch, a cup of tea warming my hands. The air smelled faintly of rain and cut hay. The sky had turned that soft shade of gold that comes only at the edge of evening when light forgets to hurry away. The wooden boards beneath my chair creaked. The same old music Arthur once called the sound of a house remembering. The ledger rested on my lap, its cover worn smooth from years of touch. I didn't open it this time. I didn't need to. Every number, every lesson was already written somewhere deeper. Across the field, Daniel was walking toward the barn, sleeves rolled up, the collar of his shirt catching the wind. He'd changed in ways words can't hold. There was a calmness in him now, a steadiness that only truth can build. He stopped halfway and turned toward me. "Mom," he called, "do you ever regret it?" His voice carried softly through the fading light. I smiled. "No," I said, "because I never took revenge on anyone. I just kept what was already mine." He nodded slowly, as if he understood more in that moment than all the years before. Then he walked back toward the fence line, hammer in hand, where work waited. Simple, honest, infinite. I watched him until he disappeared behind the barn. The wind moved through the tall grass, each blade bending like a prayer. The tea had cooled, but I kept holding the cup, letting the warmth fade gently into my palms. There was peace in that small surrender, an understanding that life isn't about winning battles, but knowing which ones aren't worth fighting. The horizon blushed with color. 1,000 shades of amber and rose stretched across the sky. I thought of Lila. Somewhere out there, maybe building something new, maybe learning how humility can rebuild what pride ruins. And I thought of Martha, her trembling voice that day in my kitchen, asking me not to take her home. She hadn't known that she was the one teaching me, the reflection of grace I hadn't realized I'd been carrying all along. The fields were quiet now, save for the hum of crickets and the slow pulse of twilight. It struck me that silence, when it's earned, is not emptiness. It's proof that storms end, those roots hold, that people, if they're willing, can begin again. I traced my fingers along the spine of Arthur's ledger. The book was heavy, but not burdensome. It had become an anchor, a witness to everything we had endured and chosen not to destroy. I could almost hear Arthur's voice, calm and sure as ever. "You don't need to shout to be strong, Irene, just stay standing." I smiled to myself. He was right. Staying was the hardest and most powerful thing I'd ever done. The porch light flickered on as the last of the daylight slipped away. Daniel came back up the path, his hands dusty, his face softened by evening. He sat beside me without a word. For a while, we just listened, to the night insects, to the whisper of the wind through the cornstalks, to the small symphony of life that keeps playing even after hearts have been broken and mended again. He looked out over the land, his voice quiet. "Dad would have been proud of you, you know." "He'd be proud of us both," I said, "for remembering what matters." He nodded. "I used to think strength was about holding on to things. Now I think it's about letting go." "That's the part people mistake for weakness," I said, "but it's where peace starts." The night deepened. Fireflies blinked in the distance, brief sparks of gold floating above the wheat. The world felt smaller, but gentler too, like it was folding itself around the quiet. I took a slow sip of tea and said softly, more to the air than to Daniel, "Some debts are paid with money, the others with humility." He turned his head toward me, smiling faintly. "You said that before." "Yes," I said, "because some truths deserve repeating." The moon rose pale and round over the fields, casting silver light across the barn roof. In that glow, the years seemed to blur, the young wife planting her first row of corn, the widow standing alone by the fence, the mother watching her son come home again. All of them were me. All of them are still here. I thought about how far we'd come, how much had been lost and found again in the quiet. I realized the farm had never been just land. It was memory stitched to soil, forgiveness growing where bitterness once tried to root. Daniel stood, stretching his shoulders. "You want me to close up the barn?" "Leave it open," I said. "Let the night breathe through." He kissed my forehead gently, then walked down the steps. The sound of his boots on gravel faded into the hum of the crickets. I sat back, feeling the warmth of that simple gesture linger like sunlight after dusk. The wind carried the faintest trace of autumn, crisp and sweet. Soon, harvest season would come, and the fields would change again. But tonight they were golden, endless, alive. I looked down at my hands resting on Arthur's ledger. Then, with a deep breath, I set it aside on the small table next to me. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to hold it. Some things can only stay sacred when you stop gripping them too tightly. As the piano in the old radio played faintly through the open window, I let my eyes drift to the horizon. The world was quiet now, still imperfect, still healing, but enough. My voice, calm and steady, spoke into the dusk as if to whoever might need to hear. If someone ever looks down on you, don't shout to make them listen. Let them see you, still standing, still gentle, still free. The night accepted the words, folded them into its fabric, and carried them away. I lifted my cup for one last sip. The tea had gone cold, but peace had no temperature. It just is. And as the final light faded from the fields, I whispered one last line, an echo from the beginning. Some debts are paid with money, the others with humility. Then I smiled, leaned back, and let the evening close gently around me.